So if we take the powers that are broken of Sheogorath out of the equation, and we assume we didn't get the DLC, and we're just the hero of Kavash, what does that leave us with? It leaves us with a hero, somebody who was a prisoner, like they say in the cosmology of the Elder Scrolls, and it's somebody who doesn't have the powers similar to what the Dragonborn might have. This person would just be like the Eternal Champion, the Agent. No role like the Nerevarine, where it's this like possible thing where you question, are you really the incarnation of Indoril Nerevar, and do you make it true? Do you make it actually happen? That was one of the parts that made, for a lot of people, Morrowind so interesting. In Oblivion, you really are just like the first and second protagonist, a person. So you may become Sheogorath, but let's say you're not Sheogorath through your duration of the game. You could be a mage, you could be a badass Altmer, and you could just zip and zoom into every realm with your elite conjuration hacking skills. You could be that Thalmor Navy SEAL that has 300 confirmed blade skills and all that. But you know what? Let's take it a step back and say you could just be an ordinary Imperial guy that takes up like a mace and goes into these realms and has extreme, like 1 in a septillion grind set luck, where you just dodge all these fireballs, you go through everything, you go through an absolute crucible of the Deadlands, and you take those stones. I think it's rather impressive that your character just goes toe-to-toe with the Daedra themselves and continually swims up a waterfall, so to speak, of lava that you basically have to increasingly deal with tougher enemies like massive Zivali with like warhammers, claymores, extremely well armored, Dremora that have had eons to train. Time may not be even relevant, the even definition of time, because the Dremora and the Daedra and their planes, the idea of time is something that is controlled as an artificial fabrication of time by their Daedric princes, which is interesting because you think maybe there's still a real time that they're subject to that is the bound dragon Akatosh. I would say that I think the dragon breaks can even affect the Daedric realms in certain ways, but with the Daedra, it's possible that it's like time dilation, where you could have 1 second in Mundus, and this Daedra has 5 million years to train, equivalent, or has an eternal level of knowledge that might be limited by the fact that it's eternal and boundless. Which aspect of fighting is he going to draw from? The game actually shows you in experience, though, that just because this is the case, you can find Oblivion and Skyrim, and probably just in the lore, they're not omnipotent. The Daedric, lesser Daedra that you'd find, such as Zivali and Dremora, you can beat them in battle, but just an ordinary person, like a farmer with like a farming tool as like a pole arm or a pitchfork, not much of a chance there. No armor. The Daedra have exactly the best armor. They have, like I've said, just knowledge and eldritch skills that would transcend, and an arrogance that gets them pretty far against most humans, right up until their hubris catches up with them when you catch them in that one fatal slip with a massive iron claymore on your hip. So that's basically what the Daedra have. And what we have is a space alien. No, I'm fucking with you guys. What we have is an ordinary character who trains heavy armor, who trains block, trains their magic skills, becomes a really good sneak. And I think that's like the core. There's no magic like shout powers that in lore can like destroy cities, or no, like divinely handed down birthright to become dragonborn. You're just a guy that manages to go into Daedric realms, and you any percent the Daedric strongholds, like the Deadlands, the Oblivion world you go into, you can just run in there and dodge everything and try to quickly get through the rending halls of the sigil tower, take the sigil stone, and survive, and you get out there fine. Or, if that's not your flavor, you could sneak through it, or you can literally just run through it and thoroughly send every single Daedra into the chaotic creatia in the very painful process of being reborn. And that's, I think, what I like about the game, is that idea. It's reflected in both the idea of overcoming extremely powerful enemies like this, and in the gameplay, where if you set the slider right all the way to max, the game isn't going to get much harder than that. Okay, you're going to say Dark Souls, you're going to say a lot of other games that are like Super Mario Kaizo type stuff, but I'm just saying in terms of the way it's balanced, the numbers are unfair, and you can often find that if a mage has a reflect spell and you fire a spell at them, you'll die from their reflect spell. So the stuff you can use, they might use against you just as well. So I've discussed the lore a little bit. Let's talk just about some gameplay stuff. In this game, you can do hand-to-hand, and in Skyrim, you have your hand-to-hand where Khajiit do plus 10 damage, maybe plus 15, the Argonians might do plus 10, you got those unarmed gloves to boost your unarmed damage, you've got the Steel Fist, I believe it's called, in the heavy armor tree that'll give you like half of your damage resistance of your gauntlets in unarmed damage. And these are a few different legitimate ways to increase your unarmed damage. But because there's no skill, it's almost like one of those things like werewolf abilities that they really drop off, and it frustrates the player's ability to have a viable build. Well, what I appreciate in Oblivion is that there's a whole unarmed skill, hand-to-hand. And aside from just liking the way the punches throw in Oblivion and the general weapon mechanics with their alacrity, this skill is really good because every single punch you throw at an enemy, sure, your fatigue gets drained, but their fatigue gets drained as well. It's like if you played Fallout New Vegas, there's these golden gloves that will do fatigue damage and knock down an enemy. In such a game, there are multiple ways to knock down enemies, of course. There's the compliance regulator, there's fatigue damage, like I said, there's the paralyzing palm perk, there's a shotgun perk, there's super slam. But in this case, in Oblivion, you can keep punching an enemy until you knock them down, and if you continually punch them, they'll get up and they'll fall right down again. It's almost equivalent to having like a 1 second paralyzed spell. Paralyzed spells, surprisingly, in Oblivion, I wouldn't say so much in Skyrim, since you can't custom make spells. Perhaps you might say it about the enchanting, but in Oblivion, if you make a paralyzed spell for 1 second, the enemies really get up fast after you paralyze them, so you're really not getting too much benefit if you're trying to cheese it and just like stun lock them with the whole rigmarole of how long it takes them to get back up from a paralyze. They're pretty fast on it. But with this, you just keep punching. You're not going to run out of fatigue. You're going to do enough damage, and you're going to keep fatigue damaging them and making the values go into negative such that they keep falling down. I mean, fatigue is an interesting aspect of this game because it's kind of like a substitute to paralyze. There are certain things you can do, like reverse pickpocket bounds helmets onto guards that have damage fatigue and have permanently like knocked down guards just sitting there in like the whole realm. Or you can have like damage fatigue spells that will knock a character down. So there are different ways you could do it to work with fatigue as an alternative to paralyze, but this gives pure warrior characters a way to deal with certain enemies. For example, if you're playing on very hard, maybe you run into an enemy that they can kill you before you really get a lot of like close combat punches in. But if you're trying to refill a grand soul gem, say Azura's Star, and you summon a Zivali, it has a grand soul. You go up to it, you punch it a little bit, it'll get angry at you. But if you keep punching and punching and punching, as far as I know, that particular enemy has such little fatigue that you could actually knock it down and stun lock it and quickly kill it. Because I don't think it has like a very high armor rating, being that it's naked. But that's a way to quickly get grand souls. If you get the right drop on the enemy, I think it applies as far as using like punches to take down a Zivali. So that is like a very powerful aspect of the hand-to-hand skill. And what I connected there with Azura's Star never disappears. It's very easy to cast Soul Trap and then to punch a Zivali and to trap its soul in Azura's Star and recharge your magic item. Maybe not Sheogorath's Staff, because that has 20,000 enchanting points, and there's already a mechanism to make that easier for you within the game. There are other such examples, the Blade of Woe, 8,000 enchanting points. So you get the idea that you're going to have to like often refill multiple times just to charge something up to a full power level. Perhaps you could even take it to somebody else and have them charge it for you for a price. But suffice to say, if you're playing legitimately, you're going to have to deal with a lot of BS as far as trying to find enough grand soul gems to enchant your stuff or to recharge your stuff. And that's why Azura's Star is a very valuable Daedric artifact. The other thing I'll say about it is that enchanted melee weapons can be some of the most powerful melee weapons in the game. And what it boils right down to with this loop, it does make things a little bit more frustrating in a way to use the melee weapons if you're constantly having to like recharge them. You know, like kill a Zivali just to kill another enemy with this dedicated melee weapon. But you can control the way you face the Zivali, and you can catch them unaware and capture their soul, even though you don't really capture their vestige because they're Zivali. But it's a gameplay lore break, I would say. Maybe you're capturing like the energy that the Daedra gives off as they're going back to the realms of Oblivion, and you share a portion of that with the Ideal Masters, and you share a portion of that with your own weapon, the energy that is giving off as it's passing between the Soul Gem and Oblivion. But speculation aside, your enchanted weapons in the game can have, fire damage, frost, shock, weakness to all those elements, and weakness to magic. And what those effects will do successively is cause future attacks to do additional damage. And it's quite possible, I guess it depends really on like the duration, but if you were not a mage at all, you could have decent durations on some of these weakness effects and possibly swap with hotkey your melee weapons and do spell stacking with enchanted effects on an enemy just by switching your melee weapons back and forth and stacking those weakness effects with the elemental damage you're already adding to your weapon. So what are we getting from this is that you can make your own custom weapons that have elemental magic damage enchantments that basically turn your warrior character into a mage as well. You just have to have a little bit of knowledge of conjuration to cast that Soul Trap, or you get really fancy and just have an enchanted weapon cast Soul Trap, such as the way Umbra does. But this would be a more warrior mage focused hybrid way of fighting in the game. You could do it with bows, for example, but probably the effect is best seen with like daggers. So where the damage may drop off with some completely mundane weapons with their maximum damage, you could take like Umbra, you could take a unique Warhammer that you get in the Shivering Isles questline when you, I think, kill the Duchess of Dementia, which happens in either questline. If I recall right, if you side with dementia by killing Syl initially, you get the hammer that is made of both madness ore and amber ore. And alternatively, you can side with Mania by killing the Duke of Mania, but if you kill Thaydon, then Syl will side with the forces of order in the Grey March, and you'll kill her anyway. So in a way, you're saving Thaydon, if I recall right. Such weapons do have very high base damage, but magic augmentation of damage is usually the way to go in the later game. But there's a very good option for some of you that aren't going to want to deal with this stuff, such as recharging enchantments or just learn to do magic, bro. It's called Dawnfang and Dustfang, and it's the best of both worlds, because you get that melee damage, you get damage that is based on elemental damage from enchantments, but every time you reach nighttime, it turns into Dustfang, and it has a complete set of charge that is new, and at the end of a night, it turns to Dawnfang. And now it has a new enchantment, and it's fully refilled. So I highly recommend that to warrior types that want to augment their damage, but they don't want to have to constantly focus on doing stuff like recharging their custom weapons by using Zivali, or they don't want to have to resort to just using different types of like very powerful magic. It's a matter of debate with magic because, you know, with the magic recharge cost and destruction damage, your destruction damage might not be a lot with the subtraction that you get from the maximum difficulty taking away your damage. That's why you might see early in this playthrough, when I don't have every asset at my disposal, I use Conjuration with like a Frost Atronach that's a very good value. And using that, I kind of avoid having to do direct damage because it would take forever. Maybe I wouldn't have enough time to like aim at the enemy. What I found in this game is rather peculiar, and it somewhat undermines the advantage of fast running, is that if you go right up to an enemy with a punch and you punch them and you try to pull back so they can't attack you, even in Skyrim, you can punch somebody and pull back and kind of dodge the punch. It's a way that you get through a lot of like bar fights on Legendary. In this game, I find they have like frame perfect, pre-programmed AI Terminator tier prediction of when you're gonna pull in, and they swing their sword or their mace and they get you. So what's my way around this? Well, my way around this is an aforementioned sort of glitch, which is that spell stacking, where you stack the effects of weakness to magic and weakness to the element as you use your magic with on-target area effects of like maybe 10 size, the minimum area of effect, so that you can like shoot a shot and you don't have to precisely hit the enemy and still get a hit if you hit near the floor. So, I was thinking you could take spell stacking, and if you have very strong destruction skills and very strong restoration skills, you can get the best magical efficiency for any given amount of magicka. And using that, you can really have like a minimized magic cost to make the ability of spell stacking combined with what I described as spell chaining, which like undermines your level using drain magicka temporarily of magic, so that like in a kind of a convoluted way, it gives you the ability to continually cast spells. What if I suggested to you that I could do that and do the spell stacking for both an indefinite ability of casting spells, so I'm not limited by magicka drain, and there is no limit in the exponential growth and potential of my damage with my magicka spells? Well, at this current point in the playthrough, you're going to find as I've developed that I can do that up to a certain point, but then with my current levels in restoration and just the general magicka cost, the ability to keep spell chaining doesn't last forever, unexpectedly. So, the good news in that is that I haven't just found a one-stop shop panacea to all my combat problems where I can just spam a spell like Daggerfall, where I just like do a one-shot on any given enemy because I can keep spamming it and never run out and do damage that they have no way of countering. Well, there are some ways around that, like I've described, like liches that would have reflect spell for a certain percentage chance that they're able to reflect the damage from a spell. It works kind of like spell absorption, where there's an all or nothing percentage that they might reflect the damage that you give to them in the same way that you might reflect all the magic that you get from an enemy. So I think there's some interesting feedback loops that could occur with spell absorption and spell reflection, but in this case, I think that it's kind of almost like a Western shootout where I meet a lich and I've got my spells and he's got his spells, and I'm dodging his spells best I can, and I'm hitting him as fast as I can and hoping that the damage will start stacking and I'll do a ton of damage, and then he'll die from all that damage. But if there's other enemies around and I didn't get them within the range of the spell, I'm often left with a magicka deficit that's going to take way too long to heal. So it is kind of like an interesting build that is balanced in the sense that I'm like a glass cannon still. I'm quite powerful as far as my character goes with armor, but this is the maximum difficulty at my character's level with high level enemies. So at a certain point, they're just going to become like tanks that can sponge damage, as often is the case with Bethesda games, but it would take quite a while and a number of glitches, like with increasing the maximum level through going to jail, to even make that happen. But in this case, with magicka, you can overcome their damage, but we're at a level in the game and a difficulty level that typical warrior gameplay styles don't give you much benefit unless you're that guy who has made thousands of potions and you're willing to use them all.